Welcome to our online worship service. We greet you in the fellowship and spirit of the light, and may the peace of the divine be within you. My name is Alex Bradley, and I am a Unitarian minister living and working in Cheshire. And I kindle this flame with some words, firstly from Psalm 46. Be still and know that I am God. And secondly, some words written by Austin Phelps, a 19th century American minister. It has been said that no great work in literature or in science was ever wrought by a man who did not love solitude. We may lay it down as an elemental principle of religion that no large growth in holiness was ever gained by one who did not take time to be often alone with God. And a prayer. God of the many words and the silences, the fullness and the emptiness, be with us when words flow like water and when speech fails to express what is in our hearts. Be with us in our times of sorrow, despondency and fear, and may we feel your presence in times of joy, hope and expectancy. May we learn that the words we speak are powerful only when they are true to who we are in our thoughts and in our actions. May we be compassionate to one another and realize that often we all struggle to find the right words to meet the occasion of our needs. May we fill in the gaps for others with loving kindness. May we experience the fullness of your being in the emptiness that is not a vacuum, but an openness to goodness, truth, and beauty. Amen. Our first reading is taken from the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus criticizes ostentatious religiosity. He's not criticizing public worship itself, but rather a false, self-satisfied, smug piety. As Jesus was Jewish himself, he attended the synagogue as his place of worship. Hence, he refers to synagogues, whereas in our context, we might well say churches instead. From Matthew chapter 6, verses 5 to 6. When you pray, do not be as those who pretend to be someone they are not. They love to stand and pray in the places of worship or in the streets so people can see them. For sure, I tell you, they have all the reward they are going to get. When you pray, go into a room by yourself. After you have shut the door, pray to your Father who is in secret. Then your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And our second reading is by Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk and well-known mystical writer who authored many works on spirituality. The man or woman who fears to be alone will never be anything but lonely, no matter how much he or she may surround him or herself with people. But the man or woman who learns, in solitude and recollection, to be at peace with his or her own loneliness, and to prefer its reality to the illusion of merely natural companionship, comes to know the invisible companionship of God. Such a one is alone with God in all places, and he or she alone truly enjoys the companionship of other men and women, because he or she loves them in God, in whom their presence is not tiresome, and because of whom his own love for them can never know satiety. The fullness of emptiness. Have you ever tried to be really still and empty your mind in a quiet place, perhaps in a room by yourself, or perhaps a glade in a wood, or a deserted seashore in the winter. It's not as easy as it sounds. In fact, it's often not easy at all. In our modern world, it's probably harder than ever for many, if not most of us. Many times when I have tried meditating or praying or even simply sitting quietly, it has proved very difficult to keep my thoughts from straying to more mundane matters rather than focusing on the now. More than ever in our modern world, we often try at all costs to avoid silence and the absence of external stimuli. How many people do you pass on the pavement who have headphones on, presumably either listening to music or speaking into their smartphone? They cannot hear the birdsong around them, or the rustling of trees in the wind, or the sound of an approaching vehicle for that matter. It was said of a great statesman and orator that when he was alone in the room was truly empty. The implication was that here was a man who courted the limelight, but when it was no longer on him, it was as if he did not exist for himself in any meaningful sense. Whether or not that was true of that particular individual, I think it could be applied to a great many people. I think of one person I knew personally, a highly talented man who loved the attention, even the adulation he received, but who, after retirement, sank into a state of depression and helplessness, a truly sad ending for anyone's life. The great French mathematician, spiritual writer and mystic Blaise Pascal wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. We fear the silence when there's nothing to distract us, no task to engage our attention, no deadline that must be met, no phone call to be made or email to be answered. It has the potential to be a true emptiness, a vacuum, a wilderness of the heart and soul. We fear emptiness. We fear the empty glass. It is hard to be alone with our thoughts. Have you ever had to wait for a train or a bus, even when the weather is fine, or if you're under shelter? The time still seems to drag. Or we want to be where the action is, to use a telling phrase in itself. Yet the coronavirus pandemic has meant that very many people have had no choice but to spend many hours alone. Even before our present health emergency, anyone who has been bereaved, or for whatever reason has no life partner, has already experienced being alone. They have had to come to terms with their situation, whether chosen or the result of circumstances such as bereavement. The 20th century theologian Paul Tillich made an important distinction when he said, "Our language has wisely sensed the two sides of man's being alone. It has created the word loneliness to express the pain of being alone, and it has created the word solitude to express the glory of being alone." Aloneness, or solitude, is not the same as a state of inertia. On the contrary, it is the prelude to action. Jesus emphasizes that a good tree must bear fruit, just as the fig tree must bear figs or be cut down. Blaise Pascal was a mystic, but he was also profoundly practical. Among other things, he originated the idea of the omnibus or bus. The first services ran in Paris. Pascal said, "Our nature consists in motion. Complete inaction is death." Thus, our prayer, our solitude, is not an escape from the world. It is a time when we can, so to speak, recharge our spiritual batteries so that we can return to our daily lives and give of ourselves to others. So when we speak of emptiness in the spiritual sense, it can have very divergent meanings. It can refer to the condition that is akin to spiritual death, or it can refer to the power of a presence that is beyond words and definition, a power that revives and gives us new strength and purpose. Jesus valued outward prayer and the spiritual community of the synagogue, and we, following his example, value the community of our chapel, our spiritual family. Our spiritual community is important to us, just as our families are important to us. But just as the most devoted father or mother needs some time alone from their child, just as the most loving child needs some space from their parents, so we too need our time of private prayer, thought and reflection. This is not escapism. It is not the equivalent of a spiritual vacuum, but a chance to reflect on and come to terms with the people and things that really matter in our lives. Thus, like Jesus, we can go to a quiet place to pray. But what if we are unfortunate enough to live in a world of noise, under a flight path near an airport, near a busy pub, or have a house filled with noisy children for much of the day? This can make it so much more difficult, but we can still try to make our own inner space, the space that belongs to us and us alone, a place where neither our spouse, nor our children, nor even our closest friend can enter, but a secret place which we share alone with God. Sometimes we may use words for our prayers or reflections, either our own words or set prayers, like the Lord's Prayer, or words written by other people. But sometimes we will find that words are inadequate. There will be different reasons for this. We may be terribly upset or hurt or worried. Or at the other end of the spectrum, we may feel ourselves embraced by feelings of blessedness and joy. At times like this, words are inadequate to the task of expressing our feelings and state of mind. It is interesting that the Mahayana tradition in Buddhism speaks of the perfection of wisdom as emptiness. A Buddhist scholar, Edward Conzer, has written, "One must not regard the Buddhist emptiness as a mere naught or a blank. It is a term for the absence of self or self-effacement." And here again we are reminded of the words of Jesus: "Whoever would save his or her life will lose it, and whoever loses his or her life for my sake will save it." These paradoxical sayings, far from being impractical or unworldly, turn out on the contrary to be the most down-to-earth, practical and joyous way to live one's life. The more we want for ourselves, and I emphasize the word selves here, the more we are entrapped in misery. A one-time famous politician or movie star or celebrity finds that they no longer have an adoring audience. The clinging parent finds him or herself alone in a house where the children have moved away to live their own lives. You may know of cases where a once happy marriage or relationship has foundered on the rocks of a clinging or jealous partner. If we try to cling on to people or things, we will lose them. If, on the other hand, we love them for who they are or what they are, then we will live in the moment and enjoy them in the here and now. A parent will love his or her child for the sake of the child without a thought for his or her own needs or desires. Time spent alone in quiet reflection or meditation or prayer can make us more loving in our relationships, our friendships, and our time with other people. It allows us to see the world in a new light and from a different perspective, without the blinkers of our own cravings and desires. It will help us see things from the viewpoint of others. We are told several times that Jesus made space and took time out to pray alone. Our times of prayer and withdrawal are not otherworldly escapism. They are times of renewal in the very depths of our hearts and minds. They are an emptiness, but they are not a vacuum. They are a space filled with meaning, loving kindness, and peace. They are the fullness of emptiness. In losing ourselves, we save ourselves. May we find our true selves, so that we may be renewed and refreshed and ready to work and serve in our everyday lives. Amen. And now a benediction to conclude our worship. The strength of the rising sun, the strength of the swelling sea, the strength of the high mountains, the strength of the fertile plains, the strength of the everlasting river flowing in me and through me this day, the strength of the river of God flowing in us and through us this day. Bless us and keep us. Amen.